The cabin door swung open, and Eliza Garrett staggered into a wall of heat that nearly knocked her backward. A fire roared in a stone hearth wider than most rooms she'd lived in, and standing beside it, shirtless despite the blizzard howling outside, was a man built like he'd been carved from the mountain itself, broad shoulders slick with sweat, muscles shifting under scarred skin as he fed another log to the flames. He turned, his eyes locked on her, then dropped to the two shivering children clutching her skirts. "You lost." His voice was rough and used. "We're freezing," Eliza said, and her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the floor. 3 days earlier, the Bitterroot Mountain stagecoach lurched to a halt in the small Montana settlement of Pine Hollow. Eliza Garrett stepped down into ankle-deep snow, her worn black dress marking her plainly as what she was, a widow with nothing left. Her daughter Margaret, 8 years old, held tight to her hand. Her son Thomas, 6, clung to her other side, his face pale with cold and hunger. The driver tossed their single trunk into the mud. "End of the line, ma'am. Fares paid to here and no further." Eliza stared at the cluster of rough buildings huddled against the November wind. Pine Hollow consisted of a trading post, a livery, a saloon, and perhaps a dozen log structures scattered across a clearing hemmed in by towering pines. Beyond that, nothing but wilderness stretching to the spine of the Rockies. "Is there a boarding house?" she asked. The driver snorted. "Ain't no boarding house up here, ma'am. This ain't Denver." He climbed back onto the box. "Good luck to you." The stagecoach rolled away, leaving her standing in the frozen street with 2 children and a trunk containing everything they owned: 3 dresses, a Bible, a tin plate, and her late husband's pocket watch, which she'd already tried to sell twice and been offered nothing. Margaret tugged her sleeve. "Mama, I'm cold." "I know, sweetheart." Eliza pulled her daughter close, her mind racing. The last of their money had gone to the stagecoach fare. Her husband's brother in Pine Hollow was supposed to meet them, offer them shelter until she found work. But there was no one here, no one waiting. She picked up the trunk, light because there was so little in it, and walked toward the trading post. Inside, a pot-bellied stove threw out weak heat. A grizzled man behind the counter looked up from a ledger. "Help you? I'm looking for Samuel Garrett. I was told he lived in Pine Hollow." The man's expression shifted. "Sam Garrett died 2 months back. Pneumonia took him fast." The floor seemed to tilt under Eliza's feet. She set the trunk down carefully, keeping her face calm for the children. "I see. Is there work here? I can cook, clean, mend." "Winter's the wrong season for hiring, ma'am. Most folks up here barely got enough to feed themselves till spring." He scratched his jaw. "You got people elsewhere?" "No." The word hummed in the cold air. Thomas started to cry softly. Margaret pressed against Eliza's side, trying to be brave. The trader sighed. "There's a trapper named Cade Thorne, lives about 8 miles up the North Trail. Big man, keeps to himself. He came through last week. Mentioned he might pay for someone to help him cure hides through the winter. It's rough work, and He paused. "He's a hard man, but he pays fair." "Where exactly?" "You can't walk it. Not with young ones. Not in this weather." He looked past her toward the window, where snow was beginning to fall again. "I'll loan you my mule and a blanket. You bring them back come spring. We're square." Eliza had no choice, and they both knew it. They set out that afternoon. The trail climbed steadily through dense forest, the temperature dropping with every mile. Eliza had tied Thomas onto the mule's back, wrapped him and Margaret together in the trader's blanket. She walked alongside, her boots soaked through, her hands numb. By the time the light began to fail, they were deep in country that felt untouched by anything human. The trees stood like black pillars. The silence was absolute except for the crunch of snow and the mule's labored breathing. Then the wind came. It hit them like a fist, howling down from the peaks with a fury that turned the snowfall into a blinding wall of white. Eliza lost the trail within minutes. She pulled the children off the mule, clutched them close, and tried to keep moving, but she couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Margaret was sobbing. Thomas had gone silent, which terrified Eliza more. "Stay with me," she gasped, her voice lost in the wind. "Stay with me, babies, stay." A shape loomed out of the storm. Massive, dark, a cabin. Eliza threw herself against the door and pounded with fists she could no longer feel. The door opened. and she fell into firelight and warmth and the overwhelming presence of a man who looked like he could break her in half without effort, but who caught her gently and lowered her to the floor and immediately began stripping the wet blanket from her children. Cade Thorne carried Thomas to the hearth and laid him on a thick bearskin rug. The boy's lips were blue. His eyes were half closed. "Get her by the fire," Cade ordered, nodding at Margaret. His voice was rough, but his hands were steady as he rubbed Thomas's small arms, working heat back into frozen limbs. Eliza crawled to her daughter, pulled her close to the flames. She couldn't stop shaking. Her vision kept narrowing to a pinpoint, then expanding again. Cade stood, crossed to a heavy wooden cabinet, and returned with a tin cup full of something that smelled strong and bitter. "Drink. The children will be fine if you don't pass out." He pressed the cup into her hands. "Drink it." She drank. It burned all the way down, but the shaking eased. Warmth spread through her chest. Cade wrapped Thomas in a dry wool blanket, then did the same for Margaret. He moved with surprising gentleness for a man his size, his scarred hands careful around the children's small bodies. When he was satisfied they were warming, he finally looked at Eliza. "Who are you, and why are you trying to die on my mountain?" "Eliza Garrett. The trader in Pine Hollow said you might have work." His jaw tightened. "Ben sent you up here? In a blizzard? With children?" "We left this afternoon." The weather turned. Cade stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the storm. Snow was piling against the glass in thick drifts. "You'll be here 3 days minimum. Maybe a week, depending on how long this blows." Eliza's throat tightened. "I can work. I'll earn our keep." "Didn't ask you to." He moved around the cabin, pulling supplies from shelves: cornmeal, salt pork, a tin of lard. He set a heavy pot over the fire and started building a stew with the efficiency of a man who'd cooked alone for a long time. Eliza watched him. He wore canvas trousers and nothing else, despite the cold seeping through the chinks in the log walls. His chest and shoulders were heavy with muscle, his skin marked with old scars, claw marks across his ribs, a puckered bullet wound below his collarbone. His dark hair was tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite the isolation. He didn't look at her while he worked, but she had the sense he was intensely aware of everything in the room: the children's breathing, the fire's crackle, her own presence. "Why do you live up here alone?" she asked quietly. "Because people are trouble. Yet you let us in." "I don't let children freeze." He stirred the pot. "But don't mistake that for hospitality." The stew was ready within the hour. Cade served it in wooden bowls, and Eliza watched her children eat with a gratitude so fierce it nearly broke her. They hadn't had a full meal in 2 days. When Thomas's eyes started to droop, Cade stood. "Loft's up there." He pointed to a ladder. "Furs are clean. You'll be warm." Eliza carried Margaret up first, then Thomas. The loft was small but snug, lined with thick pelts that smelled of pine smoke and something wild. She laid the children down, covered them, and watched them fall instantly into exhausted sleep. When she climbed back down, Cade was banking the fire. "Thank you," she said. He didn't turn around. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Garrett. It's just Eliza now." He paused, his shoulders tightening slightly. Then he nodded once and walked to a corner of the cabin where a narrow bed was built into the wall. He lay down fully clothed, his back to the room. Eliza settled onto a bench near the fire, wrapped in a blanket he'd left for her. She should have felt afraid, alone in the wilderness with a strange man, her children vulnerable. But she didn't. There was something in the way he'd handled Thomas, the care in his rough hands, that told her more than words ever could. The storm held outside. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. She fell asleep watching the flames. Over the next 2 days, the blizzard raged without pause. Snow piled 6 feet high against the cabin walls. The world beyond the windows disappeared into a howling white void. Inside, a strange rhythm developed. Cade rose before dawn, built up the fire, and made coffee so strong it could strip paint. He worked quietly, mending traps, scraping hides, sharpening knives. He spoke rarely, and never unnecessarily, but he noticed everything. When Margaret shivered, he added another log to the fire without being asked. When Thomas stared hungrily at the dwindling stew pot, Cade filled the boy's bowl before his own. And when Eliza tried to help with the hides, he stopped her. "You don't know how? You'll ruin them." "Then teach me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he handed her a scraping blade and showed her the angle, the pressure, the rhythm. His hands guided hers once, briefly, and she felt the strength in them and the control. "You're stronger than you look," he said quietly. "I've had to be." By the third day, the wind finally eased. Pale sunlight broke through the clouds. Cade stood at the window, studying the drifts. "Trail won't be passable for another 2 days," he said. "Maybe 3. Eliza nodded. She was mending Thomas's torn coat by the fire. Margaret was reading aloud from the Bible, her small voice filling the cabin. Cade turned from the window and watched them. This woman and her children who'd stumbled into his solitude and shattered it completely. "Why'd you come to Pine Hollow?" he asked. Eliza's hand stilled on the needle. "My husband died. Fever. We lost everything. His brother was supposed to help us, but..." She shrugged. "There's nowhere else to go. No family. None that want us." Cade's jaw worked. He crossed to the cabinet, pulled out a small leather pouch, and set it on the table in front of her. "There's enough there to get you to Missoula. Maybe Butte. Bigger towns. More work." Eliza stared at the pouch, then at him. "I can't take your money. You can't stay here." "I wasn't asking to." Their eyes met. Something sharp and complicated passed between them. The silence stretched. Then Margaret's voice piped up from across the room. "Mama, can we stay? I like it here." Cade's expression didn't change, but Eliza saw something flicker in his eyes, something that looked almost like longing, quickly shuddered. "Margaret, Mr. Thorne has his own life," Eliza said gently. "We can't impose. The trader said you needed help with hides." Eliza interrupted herself, turning back to Cade. "I'm a fast learner, and I can cook better than what you've been eating. I can keep the cabin, mend your clothes." She lifted her chin. "Let me work for our keep. Through the winter. Come spring, if you want us gone, we'll go." Cade stood very still. "This isn't a place for children. This isn't a place for anyone," Eliza countered. "But we're here, and we're useful. You need help. Ben said so. I need shelter. It's a fair trade. There's nothing fair about it." His voice was rough. "You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking for a chance." Thomas scrambled down from the loft and walked straight to Cade, tilting his head back to look up at the massive man. "You're big like a bear," the boy said solemnly. "But you're nice." Cade looked down at the child. For a moment, his hard expression cracked, and Eliza saw raw pain beneath it. Old grief, carefully buried. "I'm not nice," Cade said quietly. "You gave me extra stew," Thomas countered. Cade closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked at Eliza. "One winter. You work, I provide. Come thaw, you take the mule and enough supplies to get wherever you're going. No debt." "Agreed." He nodded once, then turned back to his work as if the matter was settled and already forgotten. But Eliza saw his hand shake slightly as he picked up his knife. Winter deepened. The snow piled higher. And inside the cabin, something unexpected began to grow. Eliza kept her word. She learned to scrape hides until her hands were raw, then toughened, then skilled. She cooked meals that made Cade pause mid-bite, something like surprise crossing his face. She mended everything in the cabin that had gone too long neglected. His torn shirt, the fraying rope on the snowshoes, the weak chinking between the locks. Margaret helped gather kindling and learned to read animal tracks in the snow. Thomas followed Cade everywhere, peppering him with questions the big man answered in gruff, single syllables that somehow satisfied the boy completely. And slowly, Cade began to soften. It started small. He carved Thomas a wooden horse. He showed Margaret how to braid rawhide. He built Eliza a better workbench when he saw her struggling with the angle of the old one. One night, as they sat around the fire after the children had gone to sleep, Eliza asked, "Why do you really live up here?" Cade was quiet for a long time. Then, "I had a family once. Wife, daughter. Fever took them both in the same week." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Couldn't stay in town after. Everything reminded me. So I came up here where nothing does." Eliza's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Does it make it hurt less?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw recognition in his eyes, the understanding of one broken person seeing another. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." After that, the walls between them began to come down. Cade started talking more. Not a lot, but enough. He told stories about the mountains, about tracking wolves and outwitting grizzlies. He listened when Eliza spoke about her life before, about dreams she'd had that had died with her husband. And late at night, when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, they sat together in comfortable silence that felt more intimate than words. Spring came slowly to the high country. The snow melted in grudging inches. The first green shoots appeared in the meadow below the cabin, and Eliza realized she didn't want to leave. She was standing outside one morning, watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold, when Cade came up beside her. "Trail's clear," he said. "You can make Pine Hollow by afternoon." Her heart sank. "I know. I packed supplies. Enough to get you to Butte, if that's where you're headed." Eliza turned to face him. This man who'd saved them, sheltered them, and somewhere along the way become the safest place she'd ever known. "What if I don't want to go to Butte?" she asked quietly. Cade went very still. "Eliza, you said one winter. The winter's over. But you never asked what I wanted. What you want doesn't matter. You deserve better than this. Better than me. You don't get to decide what I deserve." She stepped closer. "You're a good man, Cade Thorne. A kind man. And my children love you. And I." She stopped, her voice catching. "I don't want to leave. I'm not easy to live with. Neither am I. I can't promise you anything soft. I don't need soft. I need steady. I need real." She reached out, placed her hand on his chest, felt his heart hammering beneath the scarred skin. "I need you." Cade caught her hand, held it against him. His eyes were fierce. "If you stay, it's forever. I won't let you go twice. Then don't let me go once." He kissed her. It was rough and desperate, and tasted like pine smoke and hope. When they finally broke apart, Thomas was hanging out the loft window, grinning. "Does this mean we're staying?" Cade laughed, a deep, rusty sound, like something unused for too long finally breaking free. "Yeah, boy, you're staying." By summer, Cade had expanded the cabin, adding a proper room for the children, a bigger hearth, glass windows that let in the light. He built Eliza a garden plot and helped her clear stones from the soil. They were married in the meadow by a traveling preacher, with Margaret and Thomas as witnesses and wildflowers woven into Eliza's hair. And on cold nights, when the wind howled down from the peaks, Eliza lay beside her husband in the home he'd built with his own hands and knew she'd finally found the place she belonged. Not because it was easy, but because it was theirs. The widow with nothing left had found a man alone in the frozen forest, and together, they built something neither could have made alone: a family, a home, and a love as enduring as the mountains themselves.